right, CypherCon, how are we doing? It's 8 o'clock at night. I had to go out and look. I have never done this late in the evening before. This is kind of interesting. So hey, thanks. It's great to see you all here. I am Alyssa Miller. For those of you that don't know, quick background. I mean, I've been in cybersecurity most of my life. The story goes, bought my first computer when I was 12, hacked Prodigy, things like that. So yeah, hacker my whole life. Found my way into an executive role, which is really kind of bizarre. I'm still kind of getting used to that, but that's where I find myself now. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for a legal technologies company that's based in New York. But I have lived here my entire life. This is my hometown. I love being able to actually speak at a conference in Milwaukee. Holy shit, like we do this here. So, let's see, what else can I tell you about myself real quick? I'm an author. I speak clearly because I'm standing up here, so that's the theory anyway. If we're connected on social media, you know that I've also kind of taken on another passion recently. If you're not connected to me on social media, you probably knew from the title of this talk that it had something to do with these winged things that fly up in the sky. Well, that was cool. So yeah, a couple years ago, I finally accomplished a lifelong dream, became a pilot. Private pilot. In fact, I actually have an instrument check ride coming up on Saturday if that weather holds up out there. So we'll see how that goes. But so this is something I always wanted to do, right? And finally, a couple years ago, I got my license. And as I'm training now for this instrument rating, you know, flying to different airports and whatever, one of the things I have to do is fly on an instrument flight plan. And it's part of the process. And so was out doing this. Boy, this had been back in November. Flew down to DuPage, Illinois. Anyone familiar with DuPage? Now I know where my Illinois people are. Excellent. Flew down to Illinois, went to DuPage Airport with my instructor. We stopped, we went up, we did a tower tour. It was all great, whatever. Get back in the plane and roll out, go get ready, take off. And that's when things went a little sideways. So,
runway 20 right.
So this is, now unfortunately I didn't have audio recorded. I didn't have camera in my plane because for flight lessons I don't do that. But so this is out of an app called 4Flight. It's my entire flight track log that day. So what you didn't hear there was tower clearing me to take off. And so this is me rolling out.
700 Zulu Golf DuPage Tower, Roger.
And you can, you know, DuPage is super busy, right? And you can hear that in the background. They've got a lot of people going in the pattern. You can see there's parallel runways. But so I'm going to take off here. And what you're going to see is you're going to see my plane start to climb. And you can't really see it because it's kind of cut off. But that number that's ticking up in the upper left, that's my altitude. And what you're going to see is after a few minutes, I'm going to start to turn out to the right because we were headed to Platteville. And you're going to see that number stop.
Track 561 Alpha DuPage Tower, Roger, stand by. 41 Delta X10 down, tower calls to base, multiple departures. Copy, we'll extend our downwind. You'll call our base, 41 Delta.
So right around here, you see it kind of slow down.
Over to departure. Have a good day, 55 Juliet.
So right about there, right after that was them handing me off. You might have recognized my voice there. Handing me off to the departure controller, and then this happens.
79 Victor, Roger. You're following Skyhawk traffic 2 miles ahead of you, then down. Reporting site. Traffic is 79 Victor. Page Tower, Cherokee 6355 Juliet, declaring an emergency. We're having reduced power here. Cherokee 55 Juliet, Roger. What runway would you like? Whatever we can get first. Looks like maybe 10 will be landing with a tailwind. Cherokee 55 Juliet, Roger. Enter a right base runway 10.
So if you didn't catch that, that's me declaring an emergency, letting them know the reason why that altitude stopped ticking up. Well, we got to about 700 feet over the ground. suddenly my engine starts making a lot less power. Okay, you got a tachometer just like you'd have in your car, and all of a sudden I feel the plane, the whole thing slows down, dips down a little bit. I have no idea what's going on at this point. All I know is engine's still running. It didn't stop running, but clearly I'm in the middle of an incident here. So now they're clearing me to land. Basically, I was able to turn around, go right back, and there was a crossing runway. It was the first runway I was going to encounter, and I knew that as I was taking off. So I'm landing here, and what you may or may not have heard before, but I'm landing with a tailwind now, which for those of you that know anything about aircraft, generally we try to land going into the wind because then it allows us to have a slower speed when we touch down. This is about a 6,000-foot runway. I used every inch of it because I had the wind behind me, and I was trying to conserve energy in case I lost my engine. So long story short, it worked out. All right. I got a friendly visit from DuPage Airport Authority fire truck. They came out, they took some of my information, but we made it back. Used all 6,000 feet. My plane normally lands in about 1,500 feet, so you can do the math on that. We rolled out a little long. We were coming in really fast, but we got to the ground, and that's the most important thing. But so this got me to thinking, right? You start thinking about all the things that went on in this moment, how I reacted, all the stuff that I could have done. What could I have done to prevent it, right? Get to the ground, and we did a number of things with the plane and, tried to figure out what the heck was going on. I ended up leaving the plane there, and they had to repair it there at DuPage. I'll tell you a little later what happened. But later on, I started thinking more about this. I'm like, man, there's a lot of parallels between what just went on here in my little aviation emergency and what goes on when we're dealing with an incident response situation or even setting up our incident response plans. So a person once said to me, and I think they got this from somebody else, but give the talk that only you can give. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Kathy up here in the front row is the one who said it to me. I think you got it from someone else. You got it from Wolf. So I figured this is kind of the talk that only I can give. Okay, maybe a few other people, but how many pilots are also doing cybersecurity have also been through something like this? Not many. But the fact of the matter is they are very similar, and I started thinking about, okay, well, what lessons can I draw from this? What is something I can take from this incident and use in just how I think about incident response? So I'm going to dive into, I've got a whole flurry of these things for you, but we're going to dive into some of these. I want to start with this idea of checklists. So for those of you that aren't really up on the aviation space, checklists are like the lifeblood for a pilot. Okay, everything we do is according to a checklist. Anything that happens on the airplane, we're grabbing a book and we're looking for the checklist for how to deal with it. You go out to the plane before you even start, you do a pre-flight inspection, you pull out a checklist to do that. Everything that we do in the lead up to taking off, starting the engine, taxiing out, setting the avionics, all that, it's all checklists. The whole point of this checklist, you see the one here in red. This is my actual a page from my checklist in my aircraft. And I know it's hard to read because that's like really, really tiny. But it's things like, engine failure in flight, power off landing, engine fire, cabin fire, right? How do I handle it when something goes wrong? That's exactly what we do with our incident response plans, right? And the reason we use checklists is so we don't miss something, so that we go through a methodical process as we're trying to troubleshoot. which again is exactly what we're looking for out of our incident response plans, right? I mean, we create this incident response plan, we probably have call trees, we might have roles and responsibilities defined, we have criteria for when we communicate with people. All of that is there so we don't miss a step. It's so that we comprehensively walk through every part of it. So great, cool, you can start to see the parallels, right? Well, let's talk about where this falls apart, because there are challenges here. How many of us in here do tabletop exercises with our IRPs? Probably everybody these days. Hopefully at least 80%. That's what I saw in the room. So tabletops are great, right? They're a wonderful way. We can take our incident response plan, we can run through it, we can make sure that people are familiar with it, and ensure ultimately that our plan is good. We've got everything in there. The problem is they come with limitations. We can't exactly test our incident response plan in an incident unless there's been an incident, right? I mean, so there's kind of this problem, and it's the same thing with these checklists. I mentioned to you what some of the items were that were on there. Engine out, engine fire, cabin fire. You know what's not on there? Engines making partial power. That's my situation, so what the heck do I do? The engine out procedures, by the way, include shutting the engine off and then back on. Well, I'll tell you what, 700 feet above the ground, the last thing I'm doing is turning the engine off. If it's still running, we're getting back to the runway. So it's the same thing with our incident response plans. And this isn't to say that tabletops are bad. Obviously, they're not. Tabletops are great. But what we have to do is we have to accept that it has some limitations. And that's not to say, again, that we're trying to avoid tabletops or we shouldn't do them. What it's saying is we need to accept that those limitations are there and be cognizant of them. And we need to account for them. And we need to understand what it is that our IRP can do for us and what it is that it can't. We'll see throughout those tabletops where maybe we have gaps. We will get people familiar with what's in the incident response plan. These are valuable things. But what we won't ever get to, I'm convinced, is a situation where our tabletop makes sure that our incident response plan is ready to cover every scenario. So, why? It's a plan. Incident response plans, or any plans, inherently by their very definition, are for things that we can predict. They're for things that we can conceptualize in our heads, and we can say, this is something that might happen. This is something that we might need to consider. They are there for things like, we know if we have a breach, we have notification concerns. Yes, we know if a certain IT system is down, these are the people we need to reach out to. What we don't know is, oh, yeah, those VMs that are down over here or where we got popped with ransomware, it's because the hacker is in our hypervisor. We don't know that. We might conceptualize that that's a possibility. We might not. But by and large, most of us are probably not getting breached by things we know about. I mean, I like to think in a hopeful world that if we knew about them, we'd fix them. I might be naive, and maybe I'm a little optimistic, but in general. So again, when we think about the incident response plan, the incident response plan is there to make sure that the things that we do know about are well organized, we don't skip steps, we don't miss required notifications, especially as a CISO now with the SEC doing all that they are doing to make life hell for CISOs. I want to make sure that we don't miss any notifications that are required. I want to make sure I know who to get in touch with. I want to make sure I can call them. I want to make sure I know who is on call. These are the kinds of things. How am I going to get everybody in and on a call if our Teams environment's been breached? Do you think about that, right? So those are things, these are the things we know, right? We can predict them. But there's so much to incident response that is not about the predictable. And so we just, again, it's not that incident response plans are bad. It's not that we can ever have an incident response plan that can predict every scenario. We need to know and accept what it is that they can do and what they can't. Because at the end of the day, your IRP will not save you. This actually originally said your IRP will not save your ass, because it won't. Your IRP is not there to make you better at responding to the incident and getting recovered. Now, it sounds like, wait, what are you talking about? Then why the hell do we do them? Of course they make us better. No, they make us better at organizing the event. They make us better at executing on a plan. But at the end of the day, they're not going to get us recovered any better. They are going to make sure that we do the needful. We make the communications we need to make. They're going to make sure that we get the right people engaged. So in that sense, yes, maybe they make us a little better because we at least get the right people on. We know how to get them on the phone. We can be a little more efficient. But you know what? If you have a breach, and I can say this from, unfortunately, multiple experiences now, it's still going to come down to individual expertise, lots of improvisation, and probably some heroics. I can say confidently in every breach incident response situation I've ever been in, which in 27 years of doing this has been a few, I have not been in one where this wasn't required. I have not yet seen the incident response plan that I could hand to any person in my IT team, or I could hand to any person in the cybersecurity team, or that I could hand to anybody in the business and just anybody could execute it because they have the golden child of incident response plans. It doesn't happen that way. You guys probably recognize this airplane, or at least you understand the situation, right? Who is that? Whose plane was that? Who's the pilot? Sully, right? Okay, this guy took off. You think I had problems. All right, he took off with 2 engines. He got to about 1,500 feet and had none. All right, what do you do in that situation? You got a plane full of 200 people who are all counting on you, by the way, to keep you safe. I just had one, my flight instructor, who thankfully kept her mouth shut and just was like sat there and let me do my thing. I was like, cool, good answer, thanks. But no, so you get up in that situation. There's no checklist. I mean, there is a checklist. There's a checklist for engine out, but there's no checklist to say we're going to put this thing down in the middle of a river because that's our best option. That's being there, having the expertise to understand, okay, A, we tried the checklist, the engines aren't refiring. We know we just flew through a ton of birds, so the chances of the engine starting again is probably 0. I got to start looking for where to land. I also know this cool concept that we have in aviation called the impossible turn. Concept of the impossible turn is you lose your engine on takeoff, like completely. You don't turn back to the airport because you have no chance of making it back. Now, if you saw the movie, I know they made like a whole big thing about, like the NTSB's grilling Sully about, why didn't you turn back to the airport? And from what I understand from him, that's true but not true. They weren't like, yes, they asked the question, right? Because they want to understand what was your decision making. But it's, ultimately what it took and what it takes in every incident situation that you're going to encounter is you've got to have that expertise. You've got to have those people who understand the systems, which for many of us, that is a scary proposition because the aforementioned, we don't always know what the hell's even out there. If you guys were here for Chris Roberts' talk earlier today, he went on about this quite a bit. How are you going to protect it if you don't know what it is? How are you going to have expertise in it if you don't know what it is? But that's where we're going to find ourselves. So you may not, Sully is absolutely not a jet mechanic. Never was, never will be. So as far as him understanding what just broke out there when those birds got sucked into those turbofan engines, he doesn't know. What he knows is I've now got an aircraft that has no engines, which means that severely impacts my hydraulics. So based on that, he had the situational awareness to be able to say, this is my current state, here is where I am, here's what I know I can do with the systems that I have available to me right now. And when I talk about improvisation and heroics, that's what we're talking about. That need is never going to go away. How many of you have ever had the perfect pen test? You had the perfect pen test. You were just telling me about it. Nothing exploitable. Cool. All right. I love it. How many of you have conducted the perfect pen test? Not me either. All right, cool. All right. I'm holding you to that now. We'll talk later. I need a tester. But no, seriously, so we do a lot of assessments, right? And this kind of ties back to that whole thing with, our incident response plans as well. We can test everything we want to do. We can plan as much as we want, right? So what you see here, you see the woman on the left here, that's that pre-flight inspection. Walk around the entire aircraft. We're checking all the connections, making sure our ailerons are connected, make sure the rudder does what it needs to do. Because on some planes, you can move it. On other planes, if it moves, that's a bad day. My plane, it only moves if I use the pedals. But you're making sure you're doing your best to make sure everything is good to go. You may also be somewhat aware of this concept of the amount of inspections aircraft go through on a regular scheduled basis. We have our annual pen test. My airplane gets its annual inspection. I wish we did that with cars. There'd be a lot of unhappy people, though, because it gets pricey fast. But despite all this, my plane had its annual inspection. Now, granted, it was back in January, and this incident happened in November. But I did a full pre-flight, and part of the pre-flight even is, we do what they call a run-up. So you take the plane out there, and you go to a certain, a spot on the airport, and you bring the engine forward to, a certain RPM, and you test out a bunch of stuff. Make sure all the redundant magnetos are working and everything else, right? So all of this redundancy that's built in, you're checking all these things, make sure, because the whole plan is to make sure the engine's going to run when you go to take off, because it's kind of an important thing. When the big spinny thing stops making, noise, it's bad. And yet, despite all of that working great, I took off, and 700 feet later, things weren't great anymore. So the reality is, of course, and I think we know this, but we can do all of the pen tests we want. I've never seen the pen test that found everything. I've never seen a pen test I even considered could possibly have found everything. I've certainly never conducted one that I thought found everything. And this is why we talk about things like defense in depth and all of that. But when you start reading through some of these incident response plans, it's kind of interesting. Because there's this strange assumption that gets made that the things we know about are the things that we have to worry about. What did Chris say before? Something about protect you from the unknown unknowns? God, what a marketing phrase that is. If they could do that, they'd be bazillionaires. But we can't. So what we have to do, again, is rely on all these things I've already talked about. We need to understand we're going to need those people with expertise. We're going to use our plan to get those people in the room. But we're not going to rely on the plan to troubleshoot and resolve the issue for us. We need to still do that. And we need to understand that despite the fact that, we just had that thing pen tested last month and there weren't any vulnerabilities in it, there's still a good chance that might be the thing that got popped first. And if it didn't get popped first, it probably still got popped. I have been in incident response situations where that has come up. And the product team's insisting, well, we had a clean Veracode scan. All right, give me 10 minutes. There's your SQL injection. I mean, so, these are the things that we have to be aware of, and we need to, it's incumbent on us in cybersecurity to educate, right? So if we are not educating our executives, our business people, We need them to understand, what is this assessment actually telling us? Because a lot of us will run around and tell them, well, we do this assessment so we can find all the things to fix before the bad guys find them, right? People used to ask me what I did for a living. That was what I told them. I told them, yeah, I work for this financial services company. I hack their shit so that other people can't. It was great if I thought I actually found everything on every pen test I ever did. I know I didn't. I know I didn't pen test everything either. I know when we found things, they didn't always get fixed. That's been the story of every company I've ever pen tested. So what is the value? Why do we do these assessments? What do they tell us? Well, I don't know. Well, they give us some assurance. They do help us find easy things. If the cable broke on my aileron, that pre-flight inspection is going to tell me about it. If the fuel pump on my engine isn't running properly, that annual inspection will find that. Or my run-up will find that. So that's the way we need to be thinking about these assessments. They are a necessary evil. They are a part of what we need to do, but they are not going to protect us from everything. And we need to stop talking about it like they're going to. How many of you are familiar with the Swiss cheese model? Few hands. Where do we hear about the Swiss cheese model in cybersecurity? Mastodon. I kind of meant, what concept in cybersecurity do we usually apply the Swiss cheese model to? Zero trust. Defense in depth. Zero trust, maybe, but you just said that to piss me off. Zero cheese. No, wait a minute, you're in Wisconsin, dude. That's a crime. Shit. Zero cheese? No. So where do we hear about it most often, or at least where I hear about it talked about most often, in talk after talk after talk, although we don't see as many of these talks anymore, we would always bring up the Swiss cheese model when we talk about the cyber kill chain. Ooh, the kill chain. What if I told you that's fucking wrong? Absolutely applied in the wrong way. That is not the Swiss cheese model at all. If CrowdStrike heard me say that, they'd be pissed. No, here's the thing though. The Swiss cheese model is something that we use in aviation all the time. When the NTSB does an investigation, it is what they talk about all the time. I'm sure every single one of you in November of last year could not have identified what that is in the top picture there, but I bet every single one of you knows what that is now. The Swiss cheese. Son of a gun. The infamous plug door. Oh my God, poor Alaska Airlines and, well, Boeing, good God. We won't go there. I swore I would not pick on Boeing. But no, here's the thing. So when we talk about cyber kill chain, it's a valid thing, but it is not based on the Swiss cheese model. Why? Because what do we do in the cyber kill chain? We focus on the actions of the attacker, right? We focus on the attacker's actions and we say, well, we just got to stop that one thing, one of those steps in the cyber kill chain. If we stop that, we stopped them. Well, yeah, that's kind of how the Swiss cheese model works. But here's the thing, and this is how we need to think about it differently. I brought this up, and I hated this term, but it was the first thing that came to my head, and I said this to somebody. I said, we need to start talking about the cyber suicide chain. I don't really like to bring suicide in there, because that's a very sensitive topic for me, but the fact of the matter is when we talk about the Swiss cheese model, we're talking about the alignment of the mistakes that we make. If you look at any breach that has occurred, any of the, I'm sure when we get the details, which we'll probably never see, on AT&T, I was at a conference not too long ago where the CSO of a, how should we describe them without naming them, a certain online office supply retailer. We all do, I promise. Was explaining the chain of events, how one thing led to another. It started with a help desk employee. And even just in that moment, how did this help desk employee give away the keys to the kingdom when they reset the password? And then we're asked, well, now that you reset my password, my MFA doesn't work. Can you reset my MFA token? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the Swiss cheese model. And when we look at it from the NTSB perspective, that is exactly that's exactly how it gets applied. This is how it was meant to be applied. You look at your mistakes. You look at all the chain of mistakes that you made. Now, you could kind of loosely twist that into what we do when we talk about cyber kill chain, but it's not the same. And this is the thing that I've been really stressing in board training that I'm doing. Boards are freaked out, by the way. Boards are freaked out right now. If you didn't know this, because they see what's going on with the SEC too, and they all know that they need to talk to the CISO about cybersecurity, but they're freaking scared of us like we're scared of them. Isn't that weird? I don't know why they're scared. I don't know why CISOs are scared either, honestly. But they are. But the whole, what I've been trying to get them to see is like, look, we have to think about this in terms of we've made a series of mistakes. When defense in depth falls apart, it's not because one thing fell out of that mix. It's because a bunch of things fell out of that mix, lined up perfectly, and they found their way in. All the controls that we put in had a hole somewhere in them. And those holes in those controls lined up, and that's how they got to us. That's how we got popped. And when you start to think about it that way, instead of trying to think about, well, let's think about the attacker perspective. Well, how are you going to predict what the attacker is going to do? You're not. But I can look at my systems and I can analyze them and I can start to say, you know what? This is a hole. I mean, take that. I almost gave away the name. Take that situation I was just talking about. Should the help desk people who reset passwords also even be able to reset the MFA token? Maybe not. Or should they at least have a process that requires a whole heck of a lot more authentication at that point? How do I validate that this user is who they say they are? God, we've heard that earlier too, right? That was Wolf's and Steph's talk. These are the things we need to be looking at. But we get so focused on trying to predict what the attacker is going to do, and then we wonder why we failed to predict what the attacker was going to do. We can't predict that. So look at the things you can control. This is an important one. The best recovery path is not going to be ideal. It's going to flip and hurt. You're going to have to do things when you are recovering from an incident that are going to hurt. That plane on the left landed on a highway. I'm trying to think. Anyone know what state that is? Ashburn, Herndon, I can't remember. Oh, that's like outside D.C., I think. Virginia, yes. So they took off. They lost their engine, and she put it down on that road. Is the plane reusable? Not in its current state. It broke a lot of things. But they got it back to the ground and they're alive. They didn't kill anybody on the ground, so that's a big freaking win right there. And you're going to get those moments when you're in a disaster. You're going to have those people who are a part of your discussions responding to an incident who are going to tell you you can't do that. And your job is going to be to convince them why they have to. Well, I don't want to put it down on the highway. Can't we just go back to the airport? Did you see when that fan stopped turning? I'm sweating now because it stopped turning. So can we just put this down, please? That's what's going to happen. And so we need to be prepared for that. And those are the things where when we think about our incident response plan, we need to be thinking about how do we give the right authority to the right people to make those calls. Because what you cannot have in an incident situation is where you have your technical teams arguing with your business teams because this thing's going to frickin' hurt, but it's the only way to get our shit back. But as true as I stand here today, I promise you those conversations happen and they destroy the process of getting recovered. Sometimes you're going to have to blow away a whole database. Sometimes you're going to have to blow away an entire VM environment. Sometimes you're going to spin up that VM environment and find out that, oh shit, they were in our hypervisor, and you know what? They're still in the hypervisor. Because where did we recover it from? Oh yeah, yeah, that backup. So sometimes we have to understand that we might be rebuilding shit from scratch. No, we're not going to recover to that backup from 3 months ago because you know what? We can't definitively say when they got in. We don't know how compromised our backups are. So if you're in that situation, yeah, you're going to burn it to the ground. Back to aforementioned online retailer. They went through 3 rounds of burning it to the ground before they finally got everything burnt out. So the point here being, you need to build this in. This has got to be a part of your incident response plan, is who has the authority to make these calls. And it cannot be that the business gets carte blanche. It also cannot be that the CIO gets carte blanche, okay? But there has to be that understanding, and these, by the way, these difficult decisions are the things you should be testing in your tabletops, especially your executive tabletops. Make them make the call on something like this. Set up these scenarios. Don't just run through the incident response plan. Give them a challenge. Make it hard. Make them think. Because that's when they start to realize, oh shit, we might actually encounter this someday. You know, sometimes we do that today, right, with like ransom. Well, are you going to pay the ransom or not? Everybody's going to pay the ransom. Spoiler alert. That's what happens. They do. I don't, you know, we love to sit here and say, don't pay the ransom, don't pay the ransom. CISA's out there saying, don't pay the ransom, and everybody pays the ransom. Or you burn it to the ground. But challenge your executives. Make them make tough calls, and not just about whether to pay ransoms, but, you know, when can we blow up a system entirely? When can we blow up an entire data center? When can we take and just wipe out an entire cloud tenant? Because you might be faced with that exact question. So there's a couple of really fun little sayings in aviation. This is one of my favorites. And this one I think is going to be a little more obvious for most of you. But the saying goes, what's the first thing you do when you're in an emergency situation? Wind your watch. My understanding is this is an old Air Force thing. Wind your watch. What? In other words, take a deep breath, think about what's going on, give yourself a minute. Because the very worst thing, and this one I hope is obvious for most who've done incident response for any length of time, but rushing right in there, screaming in and shutting down accounts and blowing up servers. You just told us to blow up the servers. Well, yeah, but not always. And certainly not right away until you know what's going on. You need to develop some level of situational awareness, because sometimes blowing up the servers, sometimes disabling the account, sometimes shutting down that RDP that you had exposed to the internet right away isn't the best answer. This is where your IDP is really important. IRP, did I say IDP? That's something else. Boy, it's been a night, I told you, it's 8 o'clock. But this is where your IRP becomes important. What can you build into your incident response plan that gives people time to wind their watches? How do you make sure that there isn't that push? And some of this goes back to who has the authority to make decisions. But how do you make sure that you're not going to be sitting there with someone screaming at you, just turn it off, just turn it all off? Sometimes that's the right answer. I've been in those situations. Sometimes that is the worst possible option, is to just shut it all down, because it will actually delay your response. It will actually make it worse. Plus, of course, you know, there's always that old theory, and this is the one I think everybody knows. Well, the minute you start turning things off, now they know that you know. Now, if they detonated ransomware, they probably know that you know anyway. You know, when they start seeing your websites go offline because the ransomware fired, yeah, they kind of know you know. But there are other reasons not to just start shutting that stuff down right away. a lot of the information that you're going to need, a lot of the forensic data that you're going to need disappears the minute you shut that down. Blow up that tenant, it's all gone. Well, that's great. Yeah, okay, well, we just want to get back. We don't care about doing the forensics work. Well, guess what? You may need to do that forensic work to get anything back up again. How do you know if that backup is safe? Well, I don't know. Well, we deleted all the logs that we needed to figure out when they breached us and figure out which was our safe image. So take that time, wind your watch. Another one. This one speaks to priorities. Aviate, navigate, communicate. When you watch that video, recreation, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, you notice when the altitude stopped versus when I first radioed about an emergency. There was some time in there. Why? Because I was making sure I kept the plane flying, aviating. Navigating, I started making the turn that I knew I was going to have to make no matter what. Well, I troubleshot the issue. Then I communicated. This is the same concept we want in our incident response plans. When we think about how we're going to respond to an incident, it's got to be, what is that bare minimum thing just to keep things moving? That always has to be the focus first. Then we can bring in, how are we going to start to navigate? How are we going to start to go through our various systems and start looking for IOCs, or, we're going to go digging around and try to sort through some of this mess. And then we can worry about communication. But step one is we have to keep that progress forward. If we don't keep moving forward, we crash. All right? Just like in the plane. So when I say aviate, navigate, communicate, these are all important concepts, but they're important in that order. If I rushed to communicate and tell ATC I had a problem with my plane, what are they going to do about it? They're in a tower, a couple hundred feet away from me. They're not going to, fly up like Superman and fix my aircraft for me or fly it to the ground for me. That's on me to do. Communication's important. I had to make sure they could clear the runway, which you probably didn't hear, or if you're not familiar with the radio cadences for aviation. But the minute I told him, hey, I got this emergency, and he said, what runway? And I said, I'll take 10. And he's like, okay, you're clear to land runway 10. The rest of that time, you hear him talking, he's getting all of the other planes that were coming into that airport the hell out of my way. And honestly, when I went back and listened to that audio after the fact, I was like dumbfounded. It was incredible, the work that they did. So communication is important. But communication isn't, again, the thing that's going to get you out of the situation. So you have to keep that progress moving forward in the meantime. And I just did something fun. There we go. This one, we're getting to the end here. But this one I cannot stress enough, and this is a problem in our industry, and it's something that I don't know how we're going to fix, but it is something that I need every one of us to think about. When you read an NTSB report, one thing the NTSB does an amazing job of is not laying blame. Now, they look for cause, and they will highlight very factually the causes of a particular crash, and it's almost always causes. Again, back to the Swiss cheese model, there's more than one thing that happened that led to pilot flew into clouds and then didn't read their instruments properly or got distracted or whatever, got spatial disorientation, all the things, right? There's a laundry list of things. They don't name the pilots ever in NTSB reports. Now, there's ways to find that information. It is in a docket somewhere, but in the NTSB report, they don't do that. They stick to that religiously. FAA, on the other hand, they're the ones that come in and say, you suck, Boeing, we're going to destroy you now, and, that's the FAA's job, because they're the regulatory body. Charge ahead. The NTSB is there to make sure that we learn. And this is the part that we suck at in cybersecurity for various reasons, and it's not just cybersecurity's fault. We do not learn from these incidents. I've been having ongoing fights with my cyber insurer about wanting to see the actuarial data that they use. Who has access to tons of data about cybersecurity breaches? ChatGPT. I'm done. Damn it. No, but the cyber insurers get a chunk of this. Now what we're finding is lately the cyber insurers are getting less and less information because what are organizations doing? Yeah, we're running to outside counsel and we're claiming privilege on everything. So now you're starting to see laws change to eliminate that level of privilege. We're starting to see there's already case precedents on this that severely limits how much privilege you get with outside counsel and how much you're able to protect that way. But the fact of the matter is we constantly, because there's so much blame and shame going on and everybody's worried about the liability, we don't share this information. The government tried to do this a number of years back. We heard about Styx and Taxi and they were going to share all this information. Yeah, then nowhere. Because no one wants to participate. We're trying, there's a lot of initiatives on this route, but this is something to think about as an organization. How can you get your organization involved in some of this? Because it's something our industry needs. Do I need to say any more? AI is not going to save us, all right? Despite what many vendors just told me in the last 2 hours, well, 4 hours, AI is not going to save us. Autopilot's not going to save us. Automation is not going to save us. I saw this automated incident response ad, and I think I still have the bruise on my forehead. Automated incident response. What the hell does that even mean? But no, automation, and it's the same thing in an airplane. We have automation. In an airplane, we have autopilots. Now, they don't look like an autopilot, but we have autopilots. And what's the first thing you do in a crisis situation? Typically, it's turn the autopilot off. Because the autopilot doesn't know how to interpret a lot of the things that are going on the way that a human mind can. As smart as many of these systems are in these airplanes, you can get into a point where they're not able to do it. You hear all these things land themselves, by the way, that's complete bullshit. They do in very, very rare cases, but that's not many planes or airports are equipped for that. So trust me, most of the time your pilots land in that thing. So when it bounces, don't let them blame the autopilot. It was him or her. So I love autopilot. He's my bud. All right. So I made you sit through this entire thing, and you guys have been great. But I do need to share with you, so what the hell happened? Right? What was my root cause? So I told you, I went through all the inspections, I did this run-up, everything else, right? Everything. And it was so weird. The engine was running smoothly, but it just wouldn't make full power. Normally, takeoff power is about 2,400 RPM. It dropped from 2,400 down to 2,000, and it was just stuck right there. It's as much as I could get out of it. After we landed, we did a full power run-up on the ground. 2,000 RPM, that was the best it would do. What the heck caused this? It's not running rough. It's not like it blew something up. That's the exhaust from my aircraft. Now, on the left, that's what the entire muffler assembly looks like. The two pieces you see sticking out are the tailpipes that stick down from the front of the aircraft. So it's kind of funny to call them tailpipes because they're not really in the tail. What you see on the right is the inside of one of those two mufflers. That should be a straight tube. It should look like Swiss cheese, but it should not look like Swiss cheese that's been sitting on the table for 8 hours. And then you'll notice there's a nice chunk of that missing. So what happened in my situation was that chunk broke off while we were climbing and plugged one of those two exhaust outlets. So those two out of the 4 cylinders were now making less power. The other two were still fine. The two that were making less power were still making power, but just not enough. That's a lucky day for me. To have an engine failure and still have enough power to get back to the airport was a pretty cool deal. That's really what we're looking to do with incident response. How do we get back to the airport? We're trying to get back on the ground the safest, quickest way possible. And it's not going to be just our incident response plans that are going to be there. It is going to take our knowledge. It's going to take our experts. It's going to take improvisation. It might take some guessing at times. It might take I'm going to take a chance on this because I got no idea what the hell else is causing this. But understand that that is the nature of incident response. And again, 27 years later, I can't tell you that I see that changing because it hasn't changed in the quarter century I've been doing this. Oh my God. That is the first time I've said that, and that is the worst realization. All right, moving on. Get me out of here, Sully. Holy shit. No, I like this quote from Sully. There's a lot of quotes from Sully, as you can imagine after that. But talking about the situational awareness, talking about the need of pilots to be able to build that situational awareness in the moment. This is what we're trying to do as incident responders. We are trying to understand what is the state we are in. What do we know? How can we react to it? We will not know everything. Sully didn't know that that goose that went through the right engine took out 8 of the blades on the primary fan on the front of that turbofan engine. He didn't need to know. What he knew was he didn't have engines, either one, and that was going to affect all of his flight systems, and that was going to keep him from getting back to the airport. He knew he wasn't going to make it to Teterboro. You've all probably heard the audio. Because he knew that without propulsion, without thrust, at this altitude, that's 7 miles, I'm not making it that far. And he turned that thing, he put it down in the safest place he could see out in front of him, Hudson River. Boats came screaming up. No lives lost, barely any injuries. Wish I could say the same about more of our cyber incident response. All right, well, that's all I got for you guys. Thanks again for sticking around. I know it's a late night. This is really crazy to me, but I'm thrilled to have you all here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. There's a whole nother day, plus we still have a party tonight. Woohoo! How many got to work tomorrow? Me. I won't be partying with you tonight. Sorry. I know. Take the damn day off, Alyssa. Jesus. So, awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody. Have a good one.